Hello everyone. In this session, I am going to explain the literary terms starting with letter F. The first literary term is Fabliau. The medieval Fabliau was a short comic or satiric tale in verse dealing realistically with middle class or lower class characters and delighting in the rabbit. Its favorite theme is the scolding of a stupid husband. The next literary term is fancy and imagination. The distinction between fancy and imagination was a key element in Samuel Taylor's Coleridge theory of poetry as well as in his general theory of the mental process. In earlier discussion, fancy and imagination had for the most part been used synonymously to denote a faculty of the mind which is distinguished from reason, judgment, and memory, in that it receives images that have been perceived by the senses and records them into new combinations. In the 13th chapter of Biographia Literaria, which was published in 1817, Coleridge attributes this recording function of the sensory images to the lower faculty he calls fancy. Fancy has no other counter to play with but fixes and defines. The fancy is indeed no other than a mode of memory emancipated from the order of time and space, and the imagination is which produced a higher kind of poetry. Coleridge's imagination is able to create rather than merely resemble by dissolving the fixates and defines. The mental picture or images received from the senses and unifying them into a new whole. And while the fancy is merely mechanical, the imagination is vital. The next literary term is feminist criticism. As a distinctive and concentrated approach to literature, feminist criticism was not inaugurated until late in the 1960s. Behind it, however, lie 2 centuries of struggle for the recognition of women culture's role and achievement, and for women's social and political rights, marked by such books as Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vision of Rights of Women, and much of feminist literary criticism continues in our time to be interrelated with the movement by political feminists for social, legal, and cultural freedom and equality. An important precursor in feminist criticism was Virginia Woolf, who, in addition to her fiction, wrote A Room of One's Own, which was published in 1929, and numerous other essays on women authors and on the cultural, economic, and educational disabilities within what she called a patriarchal society that have hindered or prevented women from realizing their productive and creative possibilities. A much more radical critical mode was launched in France by Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, which was published in 1949, a wide-ranging critique of the cultural identification of women as merely the negative object or other, to man as the dominating subject who is assumed to represent humanity in general. The book dealt also with the great collective myth of women in the works of many male writers. In America, modern feminist criticism was inaugurated by Mary Illmins Taft and witty discussion in Thinking About Women, which was published in 1968, about the derogatory stereotypes of women in literature written by men, and also about alternative and subversive points of view in some writings by women. Even more influential was Kate Millett. hard-hitting sexual politics, published in the following year by Politics. Millet signifies a mechanism that expresses and enforces the relation of power in society. She analyzes Western social arrangement and institution as covered ways of manipulating power so as to establish and perpetuate the dominance of men and the subordination of women. Since 1969, there has been an explosion of feminist writing without parallel in previous critical innovation in a movement that, as Elaine Sholter has remarked, displays the urgency and excitement of a religious awakening. This current criticism in America, England, France, and other countries is not a unitary theory or procedure, it manifests among those who practice it. The various feminism, however, share certain assumptions and concepts that underlie the diverse ways that individual critics explore the factor of sexual difference and privilege in the production, the form and content, the reception, and the critical analysis and evaluation of works of literature. A major interest of feminist critics in English speaking countries has been to reconstitute the ways we deal with literature in order to justice to female point of views, concerns, and values. A number of feminists have concentrated not on the woman as reader but on what Elaine Sholter calls gynocriticism. That is a criticism which concerns itself with developing a specifically female framework for dealing with works written by women in all aspects of their production, motivation, analysis, and interpretation, and in all literary forms, including journals and letters. The notable work is Elaine Sholter's A Literature of Their Own, British woman novelist from Bounty to Lessing, which was published in 1977. One concern of gynocritic is to identify what are taken to be distinctively feminine subject matters in literature written by women, the world of domesticity, for example, or the special experience of gestation, giving birth and nurturing, or mother daughter and woman woman relation, in which personal and affectional issues and not external activism are the primary interest. Another concern is to uncover in literary history a female tradition incorporated in sub-communities of women writers who were aware of, emulated, and found sport in earlier women writers and who in turn provide models and emotional support to their own readers and sections. A third undertaking is to show that there is a distinctive feminine mode of experience or subjectivity in thinking, feeling, valuing, and perceiving oneself and the outer world. The next literary term is fiction and truth. In an inclusive sense, fiction is any literary narrative, whether in prose or verse, which is invented instead of being an account of events that in fact happened. In a narrower sense, however, fiction denotes only narrative that are written in prose and sometimes is used simplify as a synonym for the novel. Literary prose narrative in which the function is to prominent degree based on biographical, historical, or contemporary facts and are often referred to by compound names such as fictional biography, the historical novel, and the non-fiction novel. Most modern critics of prose fiction, whatever their pursuit, makes an important distinction between the fictional scenes, persons, events, and dialogue that a narrator reports or describes, and the narrator's own association about the world, about human life, or about the human situation. The central or controlling generalization of the later short are said to be the theme of thesis of a work. The next literary term is figurative language. It is a conspicuous departure from what uses of a language apprehend as the standard meaning of word or else the standard order of words in order to achieve some special meaning or effect. Figures are sometimes described as primarily poetic, but they are integral to the functioning of the language and indispensable to all modes of discourse. In it, we find certain metaphors, like a metaphor is a word or expression in literal usage denotes one kind of thing is applied to a distinctly different kind of thing without asserting a comparison, and a mixed metaphor conjoins two or more obviously diverse metaphoric vehicles when used inadvertently without sensitivity to the possible incongruity of the vehicle. The effect can be ludicrous, means girding up his loin, the chairman plods through the mountain's agenda. It is densely figurative. Poets such as Shakespeare often use mixed metaphors in a fictional way. The next is a dead metaphor. It is one which, like the leg of a table or the heart of the matter, has been used so long and become so common that its uses have keys to be aware of the discrepancy between vehicles and tenor. And the next word related to this is metonymy. It is a Greek word which means a change of name. The next is synecdoche. It is a Greek word which meaning is taking together. And the next literary term is folklore. Since the mid 19th century has been the collective name applied to saying, verbal compositions and social rituals that have been handed down society or at least primarily by word of mouth and example rather than in written form. Folklore developed and continues even now in communities where few, if any, people can read or write. It also continues to flourish among literate population in the form of oral jokes, stories, and varieties of wordplay. The next literary term is folk drama. It originated in primitive rites of song and dance, especially in connection with agriculture activities, which centered on vegetational deities and goddess of fertility. Some scholars maintain that Greek tragedy developed from such rites, which celebrated the life, death, and rebirth of the vegetational god Dionysus. Folk dramas survive in England in such forms as St. George play and the Mummers play. The next literary term is folk song. Include love song and Christmas carols, work song, sea chanties, religious song, drinking songs, children game songs, and many other type of lyric as well as the narrative song or traditional ballad. And the next literary term is folk tale. It is a short narrative in prose of unknown authorship which has been transmitted orally. Many of these tales eventually achieve written form. The term is often extended to include stories invented by a non-author. For example, The Three Bears by Robert Southey. The next literary term is form and structure. Form is one of the most frequent terms in literary criticism, but also one of the most diverse in its meaning. It is often used merely to designate a genre or literary type, or for pattern of meter, lines, and rhymes. It is, however, in a meaning descended from the Latin forma, which was equated to the Greek idea, the term for a central critical concept. And the next literary term is formalism, a type of literary theory and analysis which originated in Moscow and St. Petersburg in the second decade of this century. At first, opponents of the movement of Russian formalism applied the term formalism derogatorily because of its focus on the formal pattern and technical devices of literature to the exclusion of its subject matter and social values. Formalism views literature primarily as a specialized mode of language and proposes a fundamental opposition between the literary use of language and the ordinary practical use of language. It conceives that the central function of ordinary language is to communicate to auditors a message or information by reference to the world existing outside of the language. The next literary term is format of a book. Format signify the page size, shape, and other physical features of a book. The printer begins with a large sheet. If the sheet is folded once so as to form two leaves of 4 pages, the book is a folio. When we refer to the first Shakespeare folio, for example, we mean a volume published in 1623, the first edition of Shakespeare's collected play, the leaves of which were made by a single folding of the printer's sheet. A sheet folded twice into 4 leaves make a quarto. A sheet folded a third time into 8 leaves makes an octavo. In duodecimo volume, a sheet is folded so as to make 12 leaves. The more leaves into which a single sheet is divided, the smaller the leaf, so that these terms indicate the dimension of a book, but only approximately. The next literary term is free verse. It is sometimes referred to as open form of verse or by French term vers libre. Like a traditional verse, it is printed in short lines instead of with the continuity of prose, but it differs from such verse by the fact that its rhythmic pattern is not organized into a regular metrical form, that is, into feet or recurrent units of weak and strong stressed syllables. Most free verse has irregular line length and either lack rhyme or else uses it only sporadically. Blank verse differs from unrhymed free verse in that it is metrically regular. So that's all for today's session. Thank you so much for listening so carefully. If you like my video, please like and subscribe to my channel to watch such videos in future.